beautiful people of the internet, how are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today in this video I want to wrap up all of the books that I read in the month of March 2019. I read 5 books this month and I know to some people that's not a lot, but I'm actually really proud of that number. Usually I only read about 3 or 4 books a month, so this is above average for me, and I thought that even though I usually do bi-monthly wrap-ups, 5 books was enough to justify its own independent wrap-up. So you will have my March books in this video, and then my April books are going to be their own separate video, so hopefully I can keep this momentum going and not crash and burn in April, because if I can only read like 2 books next month, that's gonna be a really boring wrap-up video. So this month I read a total of 2,493 pages. Yeah, that's a lot, but I did read one book that was almost 1,000 pages just on its own, and my average star rating was 3.2 stars. To be completely honest, this month I had a lot of books that I thought were just very so-so. So the first book that I read in March was actually that almost 1,000 page one. It is quite a chunker. This was required reading for my Victorian novels class that I'm taking at college this semester, and it is Bleak House by Charles Dickens. This book clocks in at 989 pages, so it's not quite 1,000, but it's still pretty hefty. I mean, look at that. Is that not intimidating? Bleak House was my first ever Dickens. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I have wanted to read Dickens for a little while because he is such a well-known, highly regarded author, and he has written so many books. He was such a prolific writer. And when I signed up for this Victorian novels class, I assumed something by Dickens would be on the syllabus. I was thinking it was probably going to either be A Tale of Two Cities or Great Expectations, and those are Dickens books that, knowing what they're about, I was really interested in reading them. It ended up not being either of those, but Bleak House, which, to be honest, I had never heard of before until this class. And wow, I don't even know like how to explain what this book is about, because there is so much going on and there's so many characters that my professor had to give us all a worksheet to fill out so we could keep track of who everybody is and how they're all connected to each other, because this book is just so complicated and has so many interweaving plots. Like, this is not something you can read casually. You really need to put all your effort into this book to understand what the hell is going on. I guess the best way to explain this book is to say that we have 2 narrators. One is a third-person narrator, and the other is Esther Summerson, who grows up raised by her godmother, and she doesn't know who her actual parents are. However, she was taught growing up by her godmother that she brought shame upon her mother, which causes Esther to really have a lot of internalized self-loathing. Then, now that she's older, Esther ends up becoming the ward of Mr. John Jarndyce, who lives at Bleak House, and she goes to live with him and 2 other wards of his. And she ends up finding out lots of things about herself, including who her real parents are. There are so many other subplots going on in this book and so many characters that I can't even begin to explain all of it in this video. And I think one of my problems with it was that some of the storylines were just really ridiculous and not realistic at all. It was kind of like a soap opera in book form. There were really weird things that were happening in this book, and I can't even begin to go into it because it's so complicated. I also think that Esther, as a narrator, is not that interesting. I said in class discussions that you can tell that Esther is a female character written by a man because she has no personality and is so incredibly passive. Esther doesn't really do things, things just happen to her, and I just really wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her and say, Esther, you gotta stick up for yourself. Stop being so spineless. Despite those criticisms, there were some things about this book that I did like. I really liked the character of Lady Dedlock, who is this noblewoman who initially comes off as very cold and selfish, but then as the book goes on, you see more of her character and why she acts this way, the more depth to her. And I also think this book makes a really good statement about poverty and how people in England in this time really turned a blind eye to the poor that were suffering in their own communities. And Dickens points out how some people who are how some people who are philanthropists actually really don't care about other people, but are just doing it to make themselves look good or to feel better about themselves. And even though I don't really like how complicated this book is and how many random subplots it has, that was a narrative technique by Dickens, so from that standpoint I can appreciate it. Dickens is trying to, in this book, make a statement about the Chancery Court system in England at this time, which was a court which would handle debates over wills or inheritances. But the thing was, the Chancery Court process was so long and drawn out that people could lose their entire fortune that was at stake in the court fees, and then everybody in the case would end up walking away with nothing. So because the process is so long and drawn out, Dickens makes his novel very long and drawn out with things that happen for no particular reason. And I forgot to mention in the plot summary that one of the main points of this book, in addition to Esther's narrative, is the case of Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, which is a legal suit that her new guardian, John Jarndyce's family, has been involved in for generations. And so Jarndyce v. Jarndyce is sort of one of the central mysteries of this book, along with the identity of Esther's parents. Overall, I didn't strongly dislike Bleak House, even though there were things about it that bothered me. There were other things that I liked. I just have to say that I didn't particularly enjoy myself while I was reading it, even though I can appreciate some of the things Dickens is doing here, which is why I gave it 3 stars. It is definitely not the worst book that I ever had to read in school, but I didn't particularly like it either. Now, I just said that Bleak House I didn't hate. But this next book that I read, I actually did really hate. And to be honest, if I loved myself, I should have DNF'd it, but I was just fueled to keep going by my burning vitriol and hatred for this book because there were very few things that I liked about it. Barely anything at all. And that book was The Constant Princess by Philippa Gregory. I ended up giving The Constant Princess 1.5 stars. I very rarely give anything 1 star unless I absolutely hate it and think it's the worst book I've ever read. And even though I hated most things about this book, there was one part that I thought was good, so that's why I gave it the half. I just felt bad giving it 1 star, even though I really strongly disliked it. So The Constant Princess is one of the Plantagenet and Tudor novels by Philippa Gregory. A bunch of her books have been adapted into TV shows or movies, like The Other Boleyn Girl, The White Queen, The White Princess, and I really enjoy all of those as sort of a trashy, guilty pleasure fave. So I thought, since they're adapting The Constant Princess into an upcoming miniseries, that I should read the book before I watch the show. And I hated this book. It was so poorly written. Basically, this book follows Catherine of Aragon, who goes to England to marry Prince Arthur, the heir to the throne and the son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. However, Arthur ends up dying before becoming king, and now Catherine's future is in jeopardy. So she sets her sights on marrying Arthur's brother Henry, the new heir, and becoming his wife so she can fulfill her destiny of being Queen of England. And that brother Henry obviously grows up to become King Henry VIII, who was known for his 6 wives, of which Catherine was the first. I feel like I can say that without spoiling the book because it's historical fiction, and I feel like everybody knows about Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII, so like, if you say that's a spoiler, that she's gonna end up marrying him, like, that's not a spoiler. It's historical. It happened hundreds of years ago. I think most people know by now. I was actually seeing on Goodreads that a lot of people were reviewing this book saying it was so historically accurate. It's not. I know so much about the Tudors, Henry VIII and his wives, because I've had a lifelong obsession with them, and I can tell you that she really took liberty with the story here. It's not that historically accurate. I'm not judging you if you don't know a lot about the Tudors, and this is your introduction to them. I can see how you would think it's historically accurate, but it's not if you really look deeper into the story. Also, I just noticed from the beginning that the writing in this book was not good. It was not good at all. It became across as very info dumpy, and the narrative style made the book come across very repetitive because we have two different narrators. We have a third-person narration, and then we also have Catherine's inner monologue. We see her thoughts. But the thing was, we would have the third-person narration, and then Catherine would basically just reiterate the main points of what the third-person narrator had just said, but in her own mind with, you know, the word I thrown in there. And it just felt very unnecessary. Like, I feel like the book should have chose to be entirely third-person or entirely first-person. It did not need to be both. Also, Catherine just really annoyed me at times because she was constantly repeating herself and saying over and over again, I'm going to be Queen of England, my destiny is to be Queen of England, and she was basically saying that she was destined to be Queen of friggin' England every single page. Like, we get it, Catherine, you want to be queen. There was one part of this book, though, that just pissed me off the most, and I feel like I can talk about this even though it's a plot element, because it comes really early on in the book, so I'm not really spoiling anything, is that Philippa Gregory includes this storyline where Henry VII, the father of Arthur and Henry and Catherine's father-in-law, develops this crush on her, his 15 or 16-year-old daughter-in-law, and it really gave me the creeps. Even though the book is told mainly from the third-person narrator and from Catherine's point of view, there's also some really weird times where it just jumps into another character's head, particularly Arthur's or King Henry's, and that was really weird. And every time I had to be in Henry VII's head, with him having all these creepy thoughts about Catherine, I just wanted to go take a shower because it made me feel dirty. And, mind you, there's historically no evidence for this, actually, and I actually wrote down in my notes a scene. It's from very early on in the book, and I want to read it to you, just to show you what I'm talking about. Now, these are the thoughts that Henry VII has about young Catherine of Aragon, who is 15 in this scene, I believe. This is the very first time that he meets her, the girl who is engaged to marry his son and heir, and I'm just gonna read to you what he's thinking, and I mean, you can tell me if you think this is creepy or not. She was an utter beauty. A smooth, rounded face, a straight, long nose, a full, sulky, sexy mouth. Her chin was up, he saw, her gaze challenging. This was no shrinking maiden fearing ravishment. The perfume of her hair and the warm, female smell of her body came to him, and he felt desire pulse at his groin and his temples. He was again aware of his closeness to her, of the intimacy of the small room, the tester bed hung with rich draperies, the sheets invitingly turned back, the pillow still impressed with the shape of her head. It was a scene for ravishment, not for a royal greeting. Again, he felt the secret. He felt the secret thud of lust. The secret thud of lust. And if I have to hear the word ravishment one more time, I'm gonna lose my mind. I hated this book so much. So, sorry, I'm okay. I'm good. I ended up giving The Constant Princess 1.5 stars. I decided to give it that half because there was one part at the end of the book, well, towards the end, that I thought was pretty emotional and that I did like, but it took over 400 pages for me to get to that part. And honestly, there were very few things about this book that I enjoyed. I should have DNF'd it, but I just love punishing myself, evidently. The next book I read was one of my 5-star predictions, and that is The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. Now, I ended up only giving this book 3.5 stars. I liked it, but it really wasn't what I was expecting, and I think that's really my fault. I think I went into it thinking it was something that it wasn't. This book follows Alex, who is a teenager living in a small town, and a couple of years ago, her sister was murdered. Now, Alex knows who it is that murdered her sister, however, there is not enough evidence to punish him, so Alex decides that she's going to take the law into her own hands and get justice for her sister her own way. At the same time, she has a budding friendship going on with PK. PK is the preacher's kid, hence the nickname PK, and they meet when they are both volunteering at an animal shelter. And then there is the popular boy Jack, who develops a crush on Alex. Now, I thought this book was more of a thriller, that Alex's revenge was going to be more of a main plot point than it actually was. And the beginning of the book was really promising. I really liked the first chapter. However, it really ended up just being more of a contemporary than it was a thriller or a revenge story, which was disappointing because that was my favorite element of the book. I mean, well, there were things it did that I liked. I really appreciated how it talked about rape culture, sexual assault, things like that. I think that's a really important message that needs to get out because it's like such a problem in our country. However, I just really don't like contemporaries, so I think that's why I didn't give this a higher rating, because I never really enjoy contemporary novels anymore. This book did have multiple perspectives. We had chapters from Alex's point of view, from PK's, and also from Jack's. And though I do generally like multiple point of views, in this book I felt like it wasn't really necessary, and Alex's point of view was my favorite by far. I have to say I really did not connect with Jack's character. I wouldn't say I dislike him, but he just did nothing for me. I liked Alex and PK's friendship much more than I liked the romance. The romance just did nothing for me personally, and overall I did like some of the things this book was trying to do, and I think the reason I didn't rate it higher is just because I don't really like contemporaries. They don't do that much for me. However, I can totally understand why other people really loved this book and why they gave it 5 stars. I just think it wasn't exactly what I was looking for, and that's partially my fault because I went into it thinking it was going to be so different than it actually was. Now, I do want to give a trigger warning for this book for rape, sexual assault, and also animal abuse, so if those things are triggering to you, maybe don't read this book, and just go into it with the right expectations, and I think you'll probably like it, if you like contemporaries more than I do. The next book that I read was a reread for me. I read it during the week of Rereadathon, and that is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This is one of my favorite books ever, and I gave it 5 stars. This is a book that I originally had to read in high school during junior year in English class, and since then I've really wanted to reread it because I remembered really liking it. I just absolutely love F. Scott Fitzgerald's writing. I think he has such a way with words, and he writes so many sentences that are just exquisitely beautiful. He was a real master of language. I realized I didn't say at all what this book is about. I feel like most of you probably know, but just in case you don't, I'll try to summarize it anyway. Our narrator is Nick, who moves to West Egg? Or is he East Egg? He moves to one of the Eggs, which is a fictional pair of towns on Long Island, very wealthy, inspired by the Hamptons, and he becomes fascinated by his next door neighbor, the mysterious Jay Gatsby, who throws these super extravagant parties at his house. And Nick finds out that Gatsby has a past with Nick's cousin Daisy, and things go from there. This book does have extremely unlikable characters, so if that's not something you're into, you may not like this book that much. It personally wasn't a problem for me. I don't really know what to say about this book because it is a reread, and I feel like most people out there probably know The Great Gatsby, probably had to read it in school, or even if you didn't, you still know what it's about. I will say that when I was rereading it this time, I was reading it to see what I thought of Nick's sexual orientation, because in high school we were having this debate where a lot of people in my class thought that Nick may possibly have homosexual feelings for Gatsby, that Nick may be gay, and my teacher said that he never read it that way, and if anything, he thought Nick was asexual. I've also seen some people argue that they think Nick may be autistic or somewhere on the autism spectrum, have some kind of social anxiety disorder or something like that that makes it harder for him to connect with people. So I was rereading it trying to think, okay, what do I think about Nick's sexuality? I feel like I couldn't draw a real conclusion because I can see why you would argue either of those, him being gay or him being asexual. So I think it's really up to interpretation. I definitely see in him this disconnect in his sexual relations with women. I feel like his relationship with Jordan in the book is really just him dating her out of boredom or feeling like he should. So I definitely think that Nick's probably not straight, and you could argue about him being gay or asexual. I feel like both work with the text. The last book that I read in March was also from my Victorian novels class at college, and that is Adam Bede by George Eliot. I also gave this book 3 stars. Adam Bede is George Eliot's debut novel, which follows the events in a little fictional village called Hayslope in the year 1799. Our title character is a local carpenter who is in love with this pretty and vain girl named Hetty. However, Hetty does not return Adam's affections, and she develops feelings for Arthur Donnithorne, who is a young, wealthy, handsome heir, because Hetty thinks that a relationship with Arthur could help her escape her circumstances and give her the fortune that she has always wanted. And then there is also Dinah Morris, who is a female Methodist preacher, which causes a lot of controversy in town because people didn't think that women should be preachers, and Adam's brother Seth falls in love with Dinah. So what we really have here is not even a love triangle, it's like a really it's just a mess. Like, that's the best way to describe it. I don't think I can even call it like a love square or like a love hexagon. Let's just call it a mess, because that's what it is. I think the thing about Adam Bede is that it doesn't have a lot of plot at times. It starts off very slow, and it's really just an examination of rural life in this town. So there are pages where really nothing happens, and I just overall felt an emotional disconnect from this book. None of the characters resonated with me, and basically George Eliot tries to write characters who are flawed, who have strengths and weaknesses, and while I really like that, I kind of felt like most characters in this book were just the worst, or just did not connect with me, and it was really hard for me to care about the book when none of the characters made me feel anything. So I didn't dislike it, but did I like it? No, not really. It just did nothing for me, so that's why I gave it 3 stars, because while I don't think it's a bad book per se, reading it didn't make me feel anything, to put it frankly. So guys, those are all the books that I read in March 2019. Tell me, have you read any of these books? If so, do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post videos every Monday, and my social media links are down below if you want to follow me on Tumblr or be my friend on Goodreads. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, and I hope to see you in the next video.